Man, what is going on with Dabo and the Clemson Tigers? Um, Clemson's been on struggle streak this year currently. Currently sitting at 1-1, lost to LSU, barely beating Troy. So this week they traveled to Georgia to play Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets and their leading QB Hayden King. Um, this is a game that looks like this is a game a lot of people are thinking Georgia Tech could beat Clemson. Many like myself, it's a possibility. This Clemson team has been lackluster to say the least. LSU, feel like it was going to be a good team with their returning production. Garrett Nussmeier, things of that nature. That defense looks pretty good. So LSU is going to be a good team. But to come out the following week, after a loss to LSU, and you get Troy a lower level competition, and at one point Troy was up on you. At one point Troy held a 16-3 lead on you. There was a weather delay in there, so they kind of held things off for a while. But then you come back and you shut them out the second half. They don't score no points. The third, fourth quarter, you come out, put up 17 points in the third quarter, 7 points in the fourth quarter, and ultimately get the win. But I feel like, along with other people, this shouldn't have been that difficult. It shouldn't have been a struggle game for them. We know Troy's one of them team in the past. Troy has gotten one or two teams in the past. For those of you who remember, Troy did beat LSU. I think it was on LSU's homecoming. They had scheduled Troy, and Troy came in there and beat them, and then took their money. Because most times when you're scheduling these lower competitive teams, you're basically giving them a check to come get their butt beat. But that year, Troy came into LSU, took their money, and took BTA. Most of you know what BTA stands for. So they almost did the same thing to Clemson this year. It wasn't looking pretty through the first half, and Dabo had an interview. He was interviewed asking, what does he think, contributing to his team's lackluster performance over the first 2 weeks. And he pulled out an old Nick Saban quote, the rat poison. For those of you unfamiliar, Nick Saban used to use the term rat poison a lot to describe when teams who are heavily favored going into the year end up having lackluster years. What is rat poison? When you let the media get in your ear, when you let all of the articles, all of the headlines that you see bragging about how good you are, how good you're supposed to be, when you let all of that get to your head, and then when you go out there to actually perform on the field, you don't perform to what all the people were hyping you up to be. Nick Saban contributed. He was one of the people. He was, I think, probably he was the person that actually coined that rat poison. Using calling media people hyping up guys to hype them up in the off season, and then when the guys on the team would be reading it, basically smelling yourself. Basically, you hear people say sometimes for a young guy and going into that teenager stage, start to smell himself. And that's kind of how Nick put it, and that's kind of how Dabo was putting it out for his team, is that his guys have bought into the rat poison, and Clemson was, in a lot of articles, they were favored. You look at it, 16 returning starters, both sides of the ball. You split that up, I think it's about 8 on each side of the ball. You got your starting quarterback, who was pretty sure a lot of people had him as one of the preseason Heisman favorites, in Cade Klubnik. You returning 2 guys on the D-line that are potential top 10, maybe top 15, depending on how you're looking at it, depending on who else you want to put up there. But definitely top 10, top 15 in the draft this year, and Woods and Parker. Couple along with that with the other returning guys on defense. This Clemson team had a lot of talk this offseason. You look at the ACC, there really didn't, outside of maybe Georgia Tech, of course SMU, who their first year was in the ACC last year, ran the table, met up with Clemson in the conference championship, ultimately lost. You look at that. You didn't know what type of Florida State team you was going to get after the year they had. Having a new quarterback come in, a new coordinator, you didn't know what type of Florida State team you was going to get. It looked like Clemson was the front runner to win the conference and make a return trip to the playoffs. And I think Dabo, what he was saying is basically his guys brought into all of the hype this offseason, and they haven't lived up to the hype. Especially as a 19, 20, 19, 20, 21-year-old guy, they was probably feeling themselves, and in this day and era, social media is big, there's no telling what was being said to these guys on campus, off campus, by family members, by, whoever's influential in their ear. And these guys probably bought a lot of that hype, but at the end of the day, you still got to step between them white lines and perform. And they haven't been performing to the expectations that a lot of people like myself have put out there for them. And I think that's true. And what Dabo says about them feeding into it is very much true. These guys probably was feeling themselves this off season, and now that the season's upon us, it's not looking too good. I think they expected things to be easy, and it's not easy. The LSU game, you chalk that was two good teams right there. It was a close game. Offense stuttered, so you were expecting that offense to come back out week 2 against an inferior opponent and look better. They didn't look better. They looked at the same. They didn't really look good. You look at the stats. They're getting outgained. They only have 577 yards compared to their last two opponents, 657 yards. They're getting outgained. You can't have that. Third down conversion over the past 2 weeks, they're sitting at 32%, while the two teams they face sitting at 38%. I know it's not a big difference, but when you look at how they say this is a game of inches, that matters. It's just I think they really had a lot of lackluster performances, and they have started out really slow. And now you got a Georgia Tech team who's been humming. You have a Georgia Tech team beat Colorado, turn around, they played Gardner-Webber, beat them soundly, which was kind of a tune-up game. And so now they're getting ready for Clemson to come into town, and I'm guarantee you they're gonna have that stadium's gonna be packed. They're gonna be there because they feel like they have a chance to win this game. They feel like this is a game that they can win. And if I was a Clemson fan, I would be scared because it's a possibility that you're gonna lose this game. You lose this game, it's not gonna look good for your playoff hopes. It'll be your only conference loss so far. But you have to look at it, and you got to look around the other Power 4 conferences, how other teams are doing. You hope that LSU continues to look good, so that would be considered a quality loss by the committee. You hope that Georgia Tech looks good. But you look at the schedule after Georgia Tech, you have a Syracuse team who we'll talk about them later in week 3 preview. A North Carolina team who's iffy right now. We don't know what to expect of them. They did beat Charlotte, but we don't know. Boston College, SMU team that we don't know what to get out of them right now, coming off a loss to Baylor. A Duke team, a good Florida State team who looks good so far. I mean, they beat Alabama, but then they played an inferior opponent in East Texas A&M. Then you got Louisville, Furman, and then you finish off with South Carolina. If they do end up losing this game, they still have a chance to make the playoffs. They still got a chance to make the conference championship game. I feel like it's just going to be more difficult. But losing this game to Georgia Tech is going to hurt their odds drastically a lot. And then of course you look at the showcasing against Troy. That didn't look good either. Even though you got the W, you struggled for the majority of the game, and then it took a second half of the defense stepping up and shutting them out for you to get that W, when you should have been dominating that game from first whistle to last whistle. So yeah, this is a game. This is going to be a big game for them early in the season. You get a Georgia Tech team that's humming right now. Offense looks good. They can run the ball. You're really going to need your front seven to step up. So I'm interested to see how they respond to their head coach. Telling us that they bought into the rat poison, which it seems like they have bought into the rat poison. They bought into all of the media hype that's been around them. So we'll see. They have to pull out all the stops this week. They have to pull out all the stops. They can't hold anything back. Defense has to play sound up front. You have to play sound. You can't have any missed assignments because Georgia Tech's going to run a lot of counter zone, a lot of power. they're gonna run the ball. When Hayden King gets the ball in his hands, they have to make him pay. You know, they have to make sure that he thinks twice about having a run play call. You know, putting the ball, tucking the ball and running it. You know, that's gonna be big. And then on the offense side, you need Cade to show up. You need Cade Clement to be that Heisman contender that everybody thought he was going to be. If he wants to turn the season around, or start the trend upward, I would say, could not necessarily turn the season around because it's still early. But if he wants to start the trend upward and get this team rolling, Cade has to play a damn near perfect game. He has to play lights out this game. So I'll be watching this game. It's 11 a.m. kickoff. Yeah, Clemson got to bring it because if you lose this game, it's not going to look good for you.